The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass walls of Blackwood Technologies. As employees hurried through the lobby with nervous energy, the building hummed with whispered conversations and anxious glances toward the executive elevator. James Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 47th floor, watching the city wake up below him. At 38, he commanded one of the most successful tech empires in America, yet his personal life remained as cold and empty as his minimalist office. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, and his green eyes held the calculating sharpness of a man who had built walls around his heart 20 years ago. "Sir, your new assistant is here," announced his current secretary, Mrs. Patterson, through the intercom. Voice carried the same nervous tremor that most employees developed when speaking to him. James turned from the window, his expression unchanged. "Send her in." The door opened, and Rebecca Hayes walked into his life like a breath of fresh air in a sterile room.
Ow.
She was 28, with auburn hair that caught the morning light and warm brown eyes that sparkled with intelligence and determination. Unlike the typical corporate drone he was used to, Rebecca carried herself with confidence that seemed genuine rather than forced. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, extending her hand with a bright smile, "I'm Rebecca Hayes. I'm excited to work with you." James stared at her outstretched hand for a moment too long. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Rebecca slowly lowered her hand, confusion flickering across her features. "Miss Hayes," he said curtly, moving behind his desk to create distance between them. "Mrs. Patterson will brief you on your duties. I expect punctuality, accuracy, and discretion above all else." Rebecca nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about her new boss. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. I've reviewed the company protocols, and I'm ready to dive in." "Good. One more thing." James paused, his voice taking on an even colder tone. "Maintain strict professional boundaries. No personal conversations, no casual interactions, and absolutely no physical contact of any kind." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by no physical contact? No handshakes, no accidental brushing of hands when passing documents, no touching of any sort. Is that clear?" She stared at him for a moment, trying to process this unusual request. "That seems a bit extreme, don't you think? I mean, what if there's an emergency or something?" James's jaw tightened. "Those are the rules, Miss Hayes. Can you follow them or not?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders, meeting his challenging gaze. "I can follow your rules, Mr. Blackwood, but I think you should know that I've never met anyone so afraid of basic human interaction." The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. James felt something shift inside his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Most people cowered under his intimidating presence. But Rebecca Hayes seemed entirely unimpressed by his wealth and power. "I'm not afraid of anything, Miss Hayes. I simply prefer to maintain professional distance." "Right," Rebecca said with a slight smile that suggested she didn't believe him for a second. "Well, I suppose we'll see how that works out." Left his office, James found himself unable to concentrate on his work. He kept replaying their conversation, the way she had challenged him so effortlessly. The warmth in her eyes that made his carefully constructed barriers feel suddenly fragile. Rebecca spent her first week learning the ins and outs of being James Blackwood's personal assistant. The job itself was demanding, but manageable. What puzzled her was her enigmatic boss and his strange behavior around her. She noticed how he would stiffen whenever she entered his office, how he maintained at least 3 feet of distance between them at all times, and how he seemed to watch her when he thought she wasn't looking. The other employees treated him with a mixture of respect and fear, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that beneath his cold exterior was a man in pain. "He's always been like that," explained David Chen, the head of marketing, during lunch one day. 20 years with the company, and I've never seen him shake hands with a woman, or even accept a congratulatory pat on the back. Some people think it's just his personality, but I've always suspected there's more to it." 20 years? Rebecca asked, her curiosity piqued. "That's a long time to avoid human contact." David shrugged. "Maybe he had his heart broken. Rich guys like him tend to attract gold diggers. Could be he learned not to trust anyone. That afternoon, Rebecca was organizing files in James's office, when she accidentally knocked over a small framed photograph on his desk. As she picked it up, she caught a glimpse of a younger James with his arm around a beautiful blonde woman. Both were smiling, and James looked completely different. Open, happy, alive. "What are you doing?" Rebecca jumped at the sharp voice behind her. James stood in the doorway, his face dark with anger. "I'm sorry. I accidentally knocked this over while organizing your files," she said, holding out the photograph. James crossed the room in quick strides and snatched the frame from her hands, immediately placing it face down on his desk. "Those files don't need organizing. Please stick to your assigned tasks." "Mr. Blackwood, I was just trying to help. There's no need to be so harsh." He turned to face her, and Rebecca was surprised to see something vulnerable flash in his green eyes, before his mask slipped back into place. "I don't need your help, Miss Hayes. I need you to do your job and respect boundaries." Rebecca felt her temper flare. "You know what? I've had enough of this. I've been nothing but professional and respectful since I started working here. But you treat me like I'm some kind of threat. What exactly are you so afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything," James replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why won't you let anyone get close to you? Why do you act like human touch is poisonous? What happened to make you so scared of connection?" James went completely still. For a moment, Rebecca thought she had gone too far, that he might fire her on the spot. Instead, he surprised her by sinking into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "Want to know what happened?" he said quietly. 20 years ago, I trusted someone completely. Gave her everything. My heart, my dreams, access to my company's secrets. I thought we were building a life together." Rebecca remained silent, sensing that he needed to get this out. "Her name was Melissa Grant. We were engaged, planning our wedding. I thought I knew her, thought she loved me for who I was, not what I had. Then I discovered she had been feeding information about my business deals to my biggest competitor. Every intimate conversation we'd had, every vulnerable moment I'd shared with her, she had turned into a weapon against me." Rebecca felt her heart break a little for the young man he must have been. "James, I'm so sorry." "The worst part wasn't the business betrayal," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was realizing that every touch, every kiss, every moment of physical intimacy we'd shared had been a lie. She had been calculating and cold while I had been completely open and trusting. After that, I decided I would never put myself in that position again." Rebecca moved closer, instinctively wanting to comfort him, but stopped when she saw him tense at her approach. "So you built walls," she said softly. "You decided that if you never let anyone touch you, never let anyone get close, they couldn't hurt you again." James looked up at her, surprised by the understanding in her voice rather than pity. "It's worked for 20 years. Has it, though?" Rebecca asked gently. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living in a prison of your own making." Before James could respond, Rebecca did something that would change everything between them. She stepped forward and, ignoring his rule about physical contact, gently placed her hand on his shoulder. James flinched as if she had struck him, his whole body going rigid. But Rebecca didn't pull away. She kept her hand there, warm and steady. And after a moment, she felt some of the tension leave his muscles. "You see," she said softly, "the world didn't end. You didn't shatter into a million pieces. You're still here, still whole." James stared up at her, his green eyes wide with something that looked almost like wonder. For the first time in 20 years, a woman's touch didn't make him feel trapped or manipulated. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Rebecca," he whispered. And her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. But then reality crashed back over him like a cold wave, jerked away from her touch, standing so quickly that his chair rolled backward. "This was a mistake," he said, his voice harsh again. "Can never happen again." Rebecca felt the rejection like a physical blow, but she refused to back down. Why? Because it felt good. Because for 5 seconds you remembered what it was like to be human. "Because I can't afford to be vulnerable again," James said, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand what you're asking of me." "Not asking you to be vulnerable with everyone, James. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, not everyone is out to hurt you." James looked at her for a long moment, and Rebecca could see the war raging behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to trust her, to take the leap of faith she was offering. But 20 years of self-protection wasn't easily overcome. "I need some air," he said finally, grabbing his jacket. "Cancel my afternoon meetings." He left Rebecca standing alone in his office, her hands still tingling from the brief contact with his shoulder. She had felt something shift between them in that moment, a crack in the armor he had spent decades building. But she also knew that real change would take time, patience, and a kind of courage that neither of them was sure they possessed. As James rode the elevator down to the parking garage, his mind raced with conflicting emotions. For 20 years he had lived by one simple rule: keep everyone at arm's length and you'll never get hurt again. But Rebecca Hayes had walked into his life and challenged everything he thought he knew about safety and trust. Her touch had been gentle, comforting, completely without agenda. It reminded him of what he had lost when he decided to close himself off from the world. For just a moment, he had remembered what it felt like to be touched with genuine care rather than calculated manipulation. But remembering was dangerous. It made him want things he couldn't have, feel things he couldn't afford. Rebecca Hayes was his employee, nothing more. He had to keep it that way, no matter how much his heart was beginning to whisper otherwise. Meanwhile, Rebecca remained in his office, looking at the overturned photograph on his desk. She understood now why he had built such high walls around himself. Betrayal by someone you love completely could destroy your ability to trust. But she also believed that healing was possible, that love could triumph over fear. If someone was brave enough to take the first step, as she straightened up his desk and prepared to leave for the day, Rebecca made a decision. She wasn't going to give up on James Blackwood. Behind his cold exterior and rigid rules, she had glimpsed a man worth fighting for, and Rebecca Hayes had never backed down from a fight, especially when the prize was someone's heart. The next morning, James arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the uncomfortable tension that had developed between him and Rebecca. But as the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, he found her already at her desk, organizing files with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything else. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, offering him a warm smile that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I've prepared your schedule for today and sorted through the urgent correspondence. The Henderson contract needs your signature, and you have a video conference with the Tokyo office at 2. James paused, studying her face for any sign that she was thinking about what had happened between them yesterday. But Rebecca's expression was purely professional, as if their intense moment had never occurred. "Thank you, Miss Hayes," he said carefully, accepting the files she handed him without allowing their fingers to touch. "Oh, and James?" she called out as he reached his office door. He turned back, surprised by her use of his first name. "I brought you coffee, the good kind, from that little shop on 5th Street, not the terrible stuff from the office machine." On his desk sat a steaming cup with his name written on it in Rebecca's neat handwriting. It was such a simple gesture, yet it touched something deep inside him that had been frozen for years. Throughout the morning, James found himself stealing glances at Rebecca through the glass wall of his office. She handled phone calls with grace, managed his calendar with precision, and treated everyone from the janitor to the board members with the same genuine kindness. During his lunch break, James made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of eating alone in his office, as he always did, he walked out to where Rebecca was having a salad at her desk. "Miss Hayes, would you like to join me for lunch?" "I have some business matters to discuss." Rebecca looked up, her brown eyes lighting up with interest. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood." They went to a quiet restaurant a few blocks from the office. James chose a corner table away from other diners, old habits of maintaining privacy still strong, despite his desire to connect with her. "So what business did you want to discuss?" Rebecca asked, once they had ordered. James realized he had no business to discuss. It simply wanted to spend time with her away from the office, to see if the connection he had felt was real or just his imagination. "Actually, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. My behavior was unprofessional." Rebecca set down her water glass and looked at him directly. James, you don't need to apologize for having emotions. What you shared with me about Melissa took courage. Hearing his ex-fiance's name still made James's jaw clench involuntarily. It was a moment of weakness. It won't happen again. Was it really weakness, though? Or was it the first honest moment you've had with another person in 20 years? James stared at her, amazed by her ability to see through his defenses so clearly. You don't understand what you're asking of me, Rebecca. Trust isn't something I can just decide to do. I'm not asking you to trust everyone, James. I'm asking you to consider that maybe you could trust me. The waiter arrived with their food, giving James a moment to collect his thoughts. He watched Rebecca as she thanked the server with genuine warmth, the same way she treated everyone she encountered. Why? He asked finally. Why do you care what happens to me? Rebecca smiled, and the warmth in her expression made James's heart skip a beat. Because I see who you really are underneath all those walls you've built. You're not the cold, heartless businessman everyone thinks you are. You're someone who was hurt so badly that you decided it was safer to feel nothing than to risk feeling everything. And what if you're wrong? What if I really am as cold as everyone thinks? Then you wouldn't have hired me, Rebecca said simply. You would have chosen someone who would keep their distance and never challenge you. But you didn't. You hired someone who asks difficult questions and refuses to be intimidated by your reputation. James considered her words as they ate in comfortable silence. She was right about one thing. But he could have hired any number of qualified assistants who would have followed his rules without question. But something about Rebecca's interview had drawn him to her, even knowing she might be trouble. Tell me about yourself, Rebecca. What made you want to work for someone with my reputation? Rebecca laughed, a sound that made James feel lighter than he had in years. Honestly, the challenge? Everyone warned me that you were impossible to work for, that assistants rarely lasted more than 6 months. I figured anyone who scared people that much must be interesting. And now that you've worked for me for a week, I think you're scared of your own shadow when it comes to genuine human connection. But underneath all that, fear is one of the most decent men I've ever met. James felt heat rise in his cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had seen good in him that he had almost forgotten it existed. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you donated $50 million to children's hospitals last year and didn't want any publicity for it. I know you personally called the families of employees who were laid off during the pandemic to make sure they had financial support. I know you've been paying for David Chen's daughter's medical treatments, even though he doesn't know it. James stared at her in shock. How do you know about any of that? I'm very good at my job, James. Part of being an effective assistant is understanding who you're working for. And what I've learned is that James Blackwood, the businessman, might be ruthless, but James Blackwood, the man, has a heart bigger than he wants anyone to know. For the first time in 20 years, James felt truly seen by another person, not for his money or his power, but for the man he tried to be when no one was watching. Rebecca, he started, then stopped, not sure how to put his feelings into words. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. This time, James didn't pull away. Her touch was warm and steady, exactly like her personality. It's okay, James. You don't have to say anything. Just don't shut me out anymore. They walked back to the office in comfortable silence, James acutely aware of Rebecca beside him. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't walking through life completely alone. That afternoon brought an unexpected crisis. Thomas Morrison, Blackwood Technology's biggest investor, called an emergency meeting. James knew Morrison had been looking for an excuse to challenge his leadership, and today, he thought he had found one. Blackwood, I'm concerned about the direction this company is heading, Morrison announced as soon as James entered the conference room. Your recent decisions have been erratic, unfocused. Some of the board members are questioning your judgment. James felt his old defensive instincts kick in, the cold mask sliding back into place. My judgment has increased this company's value by 40% in the past 2 years. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. I think it might be time for fresh leadership, someone who can bring new energy to the position. James realized this was a carefully orchestrated attack. Morrison had clearly been building support among certain board members, waiting for the right moment to strike. The meeting lasted 3 grueling hours, with James defending every decision he had made while Morrison and his allies picked apart his leadership style. By the time it ended, James felt emotionally drained and more isolated than he had in years. He returned to his office to find Rebecca waiting for him with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "Rough meeting?" she asked gently. James sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 38 years. Morrison is making a play for control of the company. He thinks I'm weak, distracted. Are you? The question caught James off guard. What do you mean? Are you distracted? Because if you are, maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. James looked at her in confusion. How could being distracted be good for business? Rebecca moved closer to his desk, her expression serious. James, for 20 years you've run this company like a machine. Efficient, cold, completely focused on profits and nothing else. And yes, you've been successful, but you've also been miserable. Business isn't about happiness, Rebecca, isn't it though? Think about the most successful leaders you know. They're passionate about what they do. They care about their employees, their customers, their impact on the world. You used to be like that, didn't you? Before Melissa broke your heart? James closed his eyes, remembering the young man he had been, full of dreams and ambition. Yes, but also full of hope. He had wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. That man was naive, got destroyed because he trusted the wrong person. That man was real, James, and I think he's still in there somewhere, just buried under 20 years of fear. Rebecca walked around the desk to stand beside his chair. This time, when she placed her hand on his shoulder, James didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into her touch, drawing strength from her presence. What if Morrison is right? What if I'm not the leader this company needs anymore? Then you find a way to become the leader it needs, not by shutting down your emotions, but by embracing them. The best leaders aren't the ones who feel nothing, James. They're the ones who feel everything and use those emotions to make better decisions. James looked up at her, seeing his own reflection in her warm brown eyes. I don't know how to do that, Rebecca. I've been closed off for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be open. Then let me help you remember. Before James could respond, Rebecca did something that would change everything between them forever. She leaned down and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to his forehead. The touch of her lips against his skin sent electricity through every nerve in James's body. But instead of the panic and revulsion he expected to feel, all he experienced was warmth, comfort, and a deep sense of coming home. When she pulled away, James reached up and caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. Rebecca, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. She smiled, and in that smile, James saw everything he had been missing for 20 years. Trust, affection, hope, and something deeper that made his heart race with possibilities. I'm not going anywhere, James. No matter what Morrison or anyone else tries to do, I'm not going anywhere. James stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with her. For the first time in 2 decades, he was ready to take a leap of faith. Rebecca, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and terrifying in their vulnerability. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I think I'm falling in love with you too, James. James cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, the way she looked at him like he was someone worth loving. I'm scared, he admitted. I know, but some things are worth being scared for. James leaned down and kissed her, pouring 20 years of longing and loneliness into the gentle pressure of his lips against hers. Rebecca kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, anchoring him to this moment of perfect connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together as they tried to process what had just happened between them. What happens now? James asked. Rebecca smiled, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. Now you remember who you really are. We show Morrison and everyone else what James Blackwood can accomplish when he's not hiding behind walls. The next morning, James Blackwood walked into his office a different man. The change was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders were straighter, his smile more genuine, and there was a light in his green eyes that hadn't been there for 20 Years Rebecca greeted him with coffee and a smile that made his heart skip beats. He was finally allowing himself to feel. "Ready to take on the world, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, with a playful formality that made him laugh. "With you by my side, I think I can handle anything, Miss Hayes." The first test came sooner than expected. Thomas Morrison had called another board meeting for that afternoon, clearly planning to press his advantage while he thought. James was still reeling from yesterday's attack, but James had spent the night thinking about what Rebecca had said, remembering the passionate young entrepreneur he used to be. He realized that in protecting himself from emotional pain, he had also cut himself off from the very qualities that had made him successful in the first place. "Morrison thinks he's going to blindside me again," James told Rebecca as they prepared for the meeting. "Doesn't realize that yesterday was exactly the wake-up call I needed." Rebecca straightened his tie, her touch sending warm shivers through him that he no longer tried to suppress. "Show them the man I fell in love with, James. Show them the leader who cares about more than just profit margins." The conference room was packed with board members, investors, and senior executives. Morrison sat at the far end of the table, wearing the confident smile of a man who thought victory was assured. "Gentlemen, ladies," Morrison began, "I've called this meeting because I believe Blackwood Technologies needs new leadership. James has become distant, unfocused, more concerned with his personal issues than with the company's success." Murmurs of agreement came from Morrison's supporters, but James noticed that several board members looked uncomfortable with the hostile takeover attempt. James stood slowly, commanding attention without saying a word. When he spoke, his voice carried a passion and conviction that had been missing from his business dealings for years. "Thomas is right about one thing. I have been distant. For 20 years, I've run this company like a machine, focusing only on numbers and forgetting about the people behind those numbers. I've been so afraid of being hurt again that I stopped caring about anything except protecting myself." Morrison's smile faltered as James continued. "But that changes today. Remember now why I started this company. Not just to make money, but to create technology that makes people's lives better, to build something meaningful that will outlast all of us." James activated the presentation screen and began showing charts and graphs. But these weren't just financial projections. They were plans for revolutionary new products, partnerships with humanitarian organizations, and initiatives to make technology accessible to underserved communities. This is what Blackwood Technologies can become when we remember that business isn't just about profit. It's about purpose. It's about using our success to make the world a better place. The room was completely silent as James laid out his vision for the company's future. These weren't the cold, calculating proposals of a distant CEO. This was the passionate presentation of a leader who genuinely cared about his company's impact on the world. When he finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Even some of Morrison's supporters looked impressed by the comprehensive plan James had presented. Morrison tried to regain control of the meeting. "This is all very inspiring, James, but inspiration doesn't guarantee results. What do we know you won't retreat back into your shell the moment things get difficult?" James looked directly at Morrison, then at each board member in turn. "Because I'm not alone anymore. I've learned that strength doesn't come from isolation. It comes from surrounding yourself with people who believe in you and support you." His eyes found Rebecca through the glass wall of the conference room, and the love he saw in her expression gave him the courage to continue. "I've also learned that the greatest risk in life isn't opening your heart to someone who might hurt you. The greatest risk is closing your heart to everyone who might love you." The vote was unanimous. Morrison's attempt at a hostile takeover failed completely, and the board expressed their renewed confidence in James's leadership. After the meeting, James found Rebecca waiting for him in his office, her eyes shining with pride and love. "That was incredible," she said, launching herself into his arms. "You were amazing." James spun her around, both of them laughing with the pure joy of victory and love combined. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, setting her down gently, but keeping his arms around her. "You reminded me who I used to be. No, James, I helped you remember who you've always been underneath all those walls." James cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how natural it felt to touch her, to be touched by her. "Rebecca, I have something to ask you." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Rebecca's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee.
Oh, right, Rebecca.
You walked into my life and changed everything. You saw through my defenses to the man I was afraid to be. You taught me that love isn't a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be embraced. Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as James opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Will you marry me? And will you help me remember every day that being vulnerable with the right person isn't scary? It's beautiful? Oh. Yes, Rebecca whispered. Then louder, yes, yes, absolutely yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly from emotion rather than fear. When he stood, Rebecca threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with a passion that made 20 years of loneliness seem like a small price to pay for this moment. 6 months later, James and Rebecca were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. James's wedding vows brought tears to everyone's eyes as he spoke about learning to love again, about finding courage in vulnerability, and about the woman who had saved him from a life of emotional isolation. In the years that followed, Blackwood Technologies became known not just for its financial success, but for its humanitarian initiatives and progressive employee policies. James had found the perfect balance between professional excellence and personal fulfillment. But more importantly, he had learned that the heart he had protected so carefully for 20 years was capable of incredible love. When he finally found the courage to share it with the right person, on their first wedding anniversary as they danced in their living room to the same song that had played at their wedding, Rebecca looked up at her husband with the same warm smile that had first captured his heart. "Any regrets about letting me break down all those walls?" she asked teasingly. James pulled her closer, marveling at how completely natural it felt to hold her, to be held by her. "Only one," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "What's that? I regret that it took me 20 years to find you." Rebecca stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her love into the gentle touch of her lips against his. "Maybe," she whispered against his mouth, "some things are worth waiting for." James smiled, his heart full of the love he had finally allowed himself to feel. With you, Rebecca, everything was worth waiting for. As they continued to dance, James reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. He had spent 2 decades believing that love was dangerous, that trust was foolish, that emotional walls were necessary for survival. But Rebecca had shown him a different truth. Love wasn't the enemy of strength, it was the source of it. Trust wasn't a weakness, it was a choice that required incredible courage, and the walls he had built to protect himself had only succeeded in keeping out the very thing his heart most needed. Now, surrounded by the warmth of Rebecca's love and the promise of their future together, James knew that he would never again mistake isolation for safety or loneliness for strength. He had learned the most important lesson of his life. Sometimes, the greatest risk is not the one we take, but the one we refuse to take. And sometimes, the person who scares us the most is the person we've been waiting for our whole lives. In Rebecca's arms, James Blackwood had finally come home.